And thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really honored to be here. For me, it's morning, um, but I'm really humbled to be, following Catherine, who I admire so greatly, and so many others on this day who I'm just really find to be so inspiring and open, and really inspire me as a scholar and as a librarian. So I'm talking today about the librarian's roles in open educational resources, plural roles, since we know we have so many roles, as evidenced by my mouthful of a title. I've put the slides, I have a link to the slides that I'm putting in the chat right now. I've linked a lot of the images, so feel free to follow along and open it now if you wish, or you could save that for later, because I am going to be going through some examples and don't fully have time to open everything right now. So today, I'll be talking about OER at CUNY, so what we've done in the City University of New York. So I'm part of a wider network of colleges, and I'll talk more about that. I have a map because it's harder to explain. It's confusing to a lot of people. And then what librarians are doing and can help with within OER, as well as some of the research and resources on OER. I see this as some of the folks in the chat are also very knowledgeable and have been posting. I saw the Colbert article on OER, Ronan posted that. So some of you are already very familiar with the research and resources, and feel free to post more of those as we go through. But I'll talk a little bit about some of those and some of the conferences and resources available to everyone. So I know we asked already, Catherine asked about what your role is in general, but within your library, what role do you play? If you want to put that in the chat. I couldn't come up with a poll for this because there's just too many options of what we all do. So I'm an open resources librarian / STEM liaison. So I work on OER within my college, but I also work with our science department as well as their liaison, doing collection development and things like that. I'm on our scholarly communications committee. I also, run our reading discussion group. So if you want to put in the chat what you do within your library, feel free to go ahead. See an embedded librarian supporting teaching and learning and research, faculty engagement, collection development. So, there are aspects of all of our roles that can play in to open educational resources. So a lot of my background is in research and instruction, though I've played multiple roles within libraries, and there are skill sets that are needed within OER we need everyone's skill sets, not just those of us in research and instruction. Particularly, the cataloging and metadata folks are needed. Helping students, open research team looking to extend to open education, that's great. It's great to see these coming in. So I love to see these. I'll keep going as we go on, but just because we're limited on time. So at the City University of New York, the mission of the City University of New York is to uplift the disadvantaged of New York City. That's really actually the founding mission. And so it's already got a social justice mission built in. In some of my research, I've interviewed faculty at our senior colleges, at our four-year colleges, asking why they teach with OER. So these are faculty who have already elected to. And this quote from one of our faculty members really stuck with me about how our students can already afford to buy their books 90% of the time, when it's hard for them to pay for tuition, pay for rent, pay for childcare, and all the things they're trying to pay for. Teaching with OER is a way for them to focus on their education rather than what they have to do to get that education. So that recognition that our students lead these complicated lives, that they really just need to be able to focus on their studies rather than trying to do other things to get that education. Our students at CUNY are diverse in almost every way except for socioeconomically. They come, and this is a pre-pandemic statistic, but 40% of them come from households that are in less than $20,000 a year. So the economic imperative of OER was really there for us at CUNY, because it wasn't just, it's really, we'll talk a little bit more later about pedagogy and things like that, but the cost of textbooks for our students was such an enormous burden. And, we all know that, as Catherine said, it's not getting any better during the pandemic, that the divide of economics is really getting worse right now. So this is a map actually of the City University of New York. And these are, I'm at the college all the way at the top at Lehman College. And you can see that it really spans the 5 boroughs. So OER was starting to be looked at actually going back in a grassroots way, even though I put 2014 on there. In 2011, we have librarians who actually published about looking at open access textbooks, was what they were sort of called back then. The term OER hadn't yet been coined just as such. But in 2014, there was professional development that started to be introduced in community colleges. And in 2016, there was a big push in the United States. Achieving the Dream had a grant for 0 textbook cost degrees at community colleges. So 3 community colleges within CUNY participated in this grant to make a 2-year 0 textbook cost degree. And actually in 2016, right about this time is when I started at Lehman College. And we started working on OER just about then. We didn't have a big grant or anything like that, but a provost actually said to the library, I have some strategic initiative funds. If I gave the library a few $1,000s, what could you do with it? And I had been there all of 2 months and was like, oh, we should talk about OER. I've been hearing about this. Why don't we do something about OER? And so they agreed that we got about $10,000 and I got $3,000 of that. I think I just went mute for a second. So we got $3,000 to work on OER, and little did I think that 2 months into a job, I would be leading an initiative, but I was told, oh, it's your idea, so you'll be leading it. So I started leading an OER initiative, not actually knowing very much, but with a very little amount of money was able to put out a call for OER for faculty who were interested in teaching and learning about OER. And then, fortuitously, the timing worked out that Governor Cuomo, the New York State governor, announced that he was going to give CUNY and SUNY $8 million, so $4 million each per year for OER. So CUNY is the one you see on the map here. SUNY is the State University of New York, so it's another system of colleges that has about 60 colleges. And it gets confusing because some of them are also in New York City, but that's a separate system that we work very closely with them. But they got $4 million a year also, and we've been getting that for the past 3 years. So we've actually had, luckily, a huge amount of funding, which is not super common, for open educational resources that we've been able to focus really on incentivizing faculty to teach with OER, some production of OER, although we really focus on eliminating that textbook cost on 0 textbook cost courses, as well as building our infrastructure. So that's how titles like mine, like Open Resources Librarian, started to become in vogue within CUNY. But even campuses that don't have a specific OER librarian, every campus on this map has a campus representative for OER. And we meet regularly, once or twice a semester, as OER campus representatives. So there's about 25 campuses, so we end up with about 30 or so of us meeting about OER just within our own system. So it's kind of amazing. So we also looked into building more infrastructure in our systems as well. So we have systems that support OER as well. So these are some examples of OER. These are linked also if you want to look at them, but you can see there's a diverse group of OER. This is just a couple of them. It's not all of them by any means. But for example, in the left-hand corner is an OER 0 textbook cost course site that one of our faculty created for her nutrition course. This one is actually, she doesn't teach with just OER, she uses library resources as well. So our emphasis is really on getting to that 0 textbook cost. There wasn't an appropriate OER for her to use as her base textbook, although now she's participating in a Rebus, which is an OER kind of collaborative publishing system. So she's participating in a Rebus collection where she is developing an open textbook, but she developed this 3 years ago where there wasn't an appropriate OER. But there was a Gale ebook that she was able to find that I helped her with that meets her needs rather than a $200 ethnic foods textbook. So she teaches a cultural foods class. So this site she developed on what we call the CUNY Academic Commons, which is a WordPress instance. So it was a way for her to teach outside of Blackboard also, which is our learning management system. So to the right of that is actually a student created OER, which is My Slipper Floated Away, which is student memoirs. So students created this book where they tell their stories. It's a really actually very powerful book. I really enjoyed reading it. It's published within the Manifold platform, which is another OER platform that we've developed that was part of the CUNY Graduate Center along with University of Minnesota Press and Cast Iron Coding. And they're expanding some of the access to that, but anyone can read from it. Only people at certain institutions in the pilot can publish on it as of now, but it has built-in annotation. It's a really lovely platform. It just won Best Open Tool from the OE Global Conference. So that's another example of students writing, students being empowered to publish with a Creative Commons license. On the bottom left is an OER ancillary to an open textbook. So this professor, Alexander Nunez Torres, he is publishing his ancillaries openly. So he is using a, oh, the slide link seems to not be working for some folks. I'll look at that in just a moment. But so he's using an OpenStax textbook. And so he didn't like the slides. There are slides out there, but he wasn't a big fan of them. So he has the slides that he wants, and he's publishing those openly and posting those in our institutional repository. We also have faculty on the bottom right who have a lesson plan. And that's actually the most common OER that we create, is that faculty create their lesson plans or publish their syllabi because they're using existing OER. We don't necessarily want them recreating the wheel. We don't expect that they're going to publish open textbooks on their own. The whole power of open is collaborative. So they are often using other OER and teaching with those and sharing those. So that's pretty much the sort of some of the range of OER that we're looking at Lehman. But we're looking to get more into some student created work, as well as like Alexander Nunez Torres, who I just mentioned. He's a business faculty member. He doesn't like the business case studies that he teaches with. So he and other faculty members are writing open business case studies about businesses in the Bronx, because the ones that his students learn from typically are about, Enron or Microsoft, and they feel dated and they don't feel relevant to his business students. So those are some of the creation projects we've been working on. But the faculty find that there are pedagogical benefits, as Catherine mentioned, the pedagogy piece. So one faculty member, Yuri Gorokovich, who teaches in Earth, Environmental, and Geospatial Sciences, found that he feels like he's finding better OER and he's adding his own scholarship into the class. So he wasn't someone who did open research previously, but he found that he wanted to teach with his articles. The best way to do that was to deposit a post print of his article into our institutional repository. Now he's sharing his own scholarship openly, which he had never done before. It also became a way that some faculty talk about that they're reading more. They're able to become more of an expert in their field rather than just teaching from what the textbook gives them. So they felt more empowered rather than just saying, okay, well, the textbook has it in this order. The textbook says I should teach this way, so I'm going to do that. And instead, they develop their syllabus based on what they think should come first, based on what they believe makes sense. That they're never going to ask teachers to ask their students to buy 4 textbooks. That's not something that's possible, or, our students aren't really able to even buy 1 textbook when they're required to buy it. But with OER, if it's available for free, they're able to pick and choose the best of those resources and put together what they need for their course. So that's what we're finding in terms of the pedagogical benefits. There's been sort of a saying that's like, You come for the cost savings and then you stay for the pedagogy. So faculty who start teaching with OER, we're finding continue to want to adapt their courses, that they start with one class, but then they want to move on to teaching with OER even more. So what roles can librarians play in this? Where do our skill sets are possible to improve OER, to help faculty, to help enable this? At City University of New York, many of us who are librarians are teaching with OER, but we're also enabling faculty to teach with OER. And it's really, in our system, the librarians who are playing the lead role in it. And it's brought a lot of prominence within our library. It's definitely the biggest thing we do that gets attention on campus. So it's moved us out of our traditional realm and given us a lot of good press and good attention from the administration. So there's an open textbook or an open book, OER, a field guide for academic librarians. It's very much within a North American context, but that's not to say that librarians, in Ireland couldn't create, or anywhere really, couldn't create their own, couldn't add to this. I was just looking at it in preparation, and one of the editors, Jonathan Lashley, said he's going to keep updating it. So you could contact him and consider adding to it, or, it's got a CC BY license. You can actually change it and create your own. You can edit it. So as long as there's attribution. So, but I love this quote from the introduction, that librarians have a rich history of discovering educational materials broadly defined, ensuring access to such resources, and educating others about their use. I mean, that's really the nuts and bolts of what we do. And that's also what's needed in OER. So creating access to those resources, helping others discover them, and educate others about their use. So that's where librarians often fit into OER. In this article from Amy Van Scoy, she surveys librarians, it's through a literature review, but she looks at different roles that librarians play in OER. And you can see there's a huge number of ways that librarians are involved in OER. There's not one librarian OER skill set. In fact, Amanda Larson at The Ohio State University looked also at skill sets in OER librarian job postings, and they are all over the map. But there are a few big ones that we can work on that I see as really important for librarians to be involved. But yeah, you can see there's a huge range of what librarians can do in terms of OER and what they are doing in terms of OER. But I think the awareness piece is pretty big. So you can see this is OER in the United States, faculty awareness. This is Bayview Analytics does an annual survey. I think I saw there is a European survey. And I think the Spark person who's involved in that is actually in the room today. Vanessa, I thought I saw you come in. I watched your presentation at Open Ed, and it's actually linked in a later slide. But you can see that in the US, awareness is growing, but it's still not where it should be. It's still very low. So that's one place where librarians can really help, is with this awareness piece. Especially when you look at the Creative Commons license, faculty who are somewhat aware of OER still don't fully understand what Creative Commons licenses are. You get a lot of faculty who think because it's freely available on the web that it's OER. So we do a lot of that while not, becoming the copyright police, because I have no interest in that. But yes, growing that OER awareness. There are also loads of OER repositories and search engines. I've linked just some of them here. This is a handful. So there's so many, and it's overwhelming to faculty. It can be overwhelming even to librarians sometimes. But this is where we have certain skill sets of knowing where to search when. So those are things that we can help with, is teaching faculty, well, this is why you might want to use this search engine to find this. That OpenStax is going to have the open textbooks. A lot of these are a North American context, because that's what I'm familiar with. But, you can create the ones that are, the ones for Ireland and things like that. Catherine had linked so many. So these are some that you can look through that, you can teach faculty how to use them, how to search them, and also help them find things, because even when we teach faculty, sometimes, we still have those extra search skills that we that we like and that we get to show off sometimes. That's sometimes my favorite thing is, still, I can't find this. Can you help me? Is still my favorite question that I get, is searching for things. So some of the recent conferences on open education were, everyone has been going virtual. So a lot of these conferences are online and still available and have made things openly available. So the ones that are purple and green were from the Open Ed conference. This is the North American conference, but we had people from all over the world because it was online. And you can see that the collaborative shows up a lot in these titles. You had to be able to still log into the SCED to get access to it, to the conference website. But once you were in, the videos are actually available on YouTube. So these links in here take you directly to the YouTube version of the session. So you can watch any of these. And I think they are all openly available. So you should be able to get access to anything. But there are more than just these. But you can see that they're about creating collaborations between librarians and English faculty, librarians and other faculty. The collaborative creation of the OER metadata Rosetta Stone. You could see from that list of repositories that OER, there's all these different search engines and places they're stored in little corners of the internet, and we have to get better at sharing them. That's why we need our metadata and cataloging people really involved in OER to help facilitate that sharing, to make it easier to search, because there's issues like language or facets like license that make it easier to find. I mean, that's what the next session is also. We need to talk about OER discovery. We need to make it easier for people to find it in order to be able to teach with it. Opening up library tutorials. So when we create as librarians, are we putting the Creative Commons license on our resources so that we can make it, so that we can share with everyone? And then Vanessa's session, Vanessa gave that wonderful session on open education in European libraries of higher education, what we know so far. I learned a lot from that because I didn't know much about what's happening in European libraries, even though I did go to Ireland in 2019 for the OER 19 conference. So I was in Galway for that. I was lucky enough to go. But yes, there's so much about collaboration. The one down here at the bottom is from the OE Global Conference. So they probably had more about libraries as well, but or maybe that one was from OER 20. I actually couldn't quite, no, I think it was OE Global. They did have an easier time. I did have an easier time on the Open Ed conference finding the ones related to libraries because there was a better search feature and better tagging. So that's one of the things we have to work on, is making everything easy to find for people. And librarians have that skill set to be able to do that. And if you click on any of these logos, that also takes you to the conference websites and those links. So those are available as well for you to watch later, to think about, what can you do in your role? What can you start publishing openly? What do you already create that might be useful to someone? And you never know what might be that thing that you're already making that someone else might build on. So using the Creative Commons license ourselves also gives us more familiarity with it. And then you can see what other people can do with what you've created, which is very exciting. There's a journal coming out in the next few days, an issue of library trends on OER in the academic library, again, a North American context. But I think it's going to be a really interesting issue. I have an article in there, but the one I'm actually most excited about is Marco's article on It's Not Just About the Cost, Academic Libraries and Intentionally Engaged OER for Social Justice. As we talk more about what's the future of OER, the social justice piece is where we're headed. And one of my other OER heroes, Rajiv Jangiani, who was, collaborates with very often. He spoke with us at CUNY, and he built on that saying that I said before of, come for the cost savings, save for the pedagogy. He said, and then build for justice. And that's where we're at in OER. If we're looking at the future of OER, it's really that building for justice piece. Who are we leaving out? Where are we going with this? How are we including those voices in order to make a more equitable piece of OER, to make the organizations that we're part of more of what we want to see and reflect the people who are in it. He builds on Sarah Lambert's excellent work on OER and social justice and the 3 dimensions of social justice that she goes into. So it's really, I highly recommend reading these articles. They give such a great piece, and so many of these people also have talks online that you can find too if you're not interested in reading. They're really dynamic, excellent speakers. Another book I wanted to recommend is Open Pedagogy Approaches, which is about collaborations between librarians and faculty about OER. And in the introduction, Robin DeRosa, another wonderful open educator, says that it's about the interstitial space between colleges and libraries. And that's the architecture that supports open. That's the place that we find hope. And not because libraries are a panacea, not because everything in libraries is perfect, but because we have this space to develop and this space that we can look for in order to find open spaces and be hopeful about the future. So that's about it for me, because I want to make sure we leave time for questions. But if you want to get in touch, I'm also available. There's my email. I'm on Twitter far too often at the Stacy Lynn, and my website that has links to all of my research, which is all published openly, is at that link as well.